In the heart of Maryland, nestled within the Black Hills Forest, lay the small, unassuming town of Blair. The townsfolk were used to the eerie whispers of the wind and the dense fog that rolled in at dusk, but they were quick to dismiss the strange occurrences as mere legends. However, the truth behind the tales was far darker than anyone dared to imagine. The legend of the Blair, which began in the early 18th century with Eliza Blake, a woman who lived on the outskirts of town. Known for her mysterious abilities and knowledge of herbal medicine, she was respected by some and feared by others. When several children went missing, the townsfolk, driven by panic and superstition, accused Eliza of witchcraft. They dragged her from her home, bound her, and took her deep into the forest. Under the cover of night, they tied her to a tree and left her to die, believing this would end the curse they thought she had placed upon them. As Eliza's screams echoed through the forest, a storm unlike any other swept through Blair. Lightning crackled, and the wind howled with a fury that chilled the soul. When the storm finally subsided, the townspeople believed they were safe. But the forest, now tainted with Eliza's curse, began to change. Years passed, and the story of Eliza Blake became a ghost story, told to scare children. However, the forest was still shrouded in an unnatural darkness. Strange symbols started appearing on trees, and those who ventured too deep often returned with tales of seeing a spectral figure, a woman in white, drifting silently among the trees. In the fall of 1940, another wave of disappearances struck Blair. This time, 7 children vanished without a trace. The town was gripped with fear and suspicion, but no one could find a clue as to where they had gone. Until, one day, a local hunter stumbled upon an old, decrepit house deep in the woods, a house that had not been there before. Inside, he found the children, or what was left of them. The scene was gruesome. The walls were smeared with blood, and strange symbols were carved into the flesh of the children, who appeared to be arranged in some sort of ritualistic manner. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure watched, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The hunter fled, but not before the figure whispered his name, chilling him to the bone. The town of Blair was never the same after that. People moved away, and those who stayed lived in constant fear. The forest grew wilder, darker, and the symbols continued to appear. In the 1990s, a group of filmmakers decided to investigate the legend of the Blair Witch. They interviewed locals, pieced together the history, and ventured into the forest with their cameras. What they found was beyond their worst nightmares. As they trekked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. They came across strange rock formations and stick figures hanging from trees, unmistakable signs of the witch's presence. Each night, they were tormented by unseen forces, whispers in the dark, unseen hands tugging at their clothes, and the constant feeling of being watched. One by one, the filmmakers succumbed to the terror. They were dragged screaming into the darkness, their cries echoing through the forest. Their footage, found months later, revealed the true horror. Shadows moved just beyond the light of their campfire, and in the final, harrowing moments, the face of the Blair Witch was captured, twisted and contorted with rage. In present day, the town of Blair is nearly abandoned, a ghost town in every sense. But the forest remains, and those who are foolish enough to enter seldom return. On the outskirts, an old house stands, seemingly untouched by time. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of decay, and the walls are covered in the same bloodied symbols. The spirit of Eliza Blake, the Blair Witch, roams the halls, her rage and sorrow manifesting in horrific ways. Those who enter the house report feeling an icy hand clutching at their hearts, hearing the soft, maddening whispers of the witch, promising them the same fate as those who wronged her. Blood drips from the walls, forming pools that seem to pulse with a life of their own. Shadowy figures move just out of sight, and the air is filled with the agonized screams of her victims. No one knows how to end the curse. Some believe that appeasing the witch with sacrifices might work, while others think that destroying the house might set her free. But one thing is certain. As long as the forest stands, the Blair Witch will continue her reign of terror, her vengeance unfulfilled, her wrath unquenchable. And so, the legend continues to grow, a dark stain on the history of Blair. Those who hear the story are compelled by a morbid curiosity, drawn to the forest by an unseen force. But beware, for once you enter the domain of the Blair Witch, there is no escape. The darkness will consume you, the witch will find you, and your screams will join the chorus of the damned. A new group of thrill-seekers arrived in Blair, oblivious to the town's dark history. Among them were Sarah, a local historian obsessed with uncovering the truth; Mark, a skeptic convinced the legend was a hoax; Jenny, a psychic drawn by the forest's dark energy; and Tom, an amateur filmmaker eager to document their journey. They set up camp at the edge of the forest, their spirits high and their resolve strong. Sarah shared the legend around the campfire, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a hint of fear. Mark scoffed, but Jenny and Tom listened intently, the forest seeming to close in around them as the night grew darker. The next day, they ventured deeper into the woods, following a path Sarah had found in an old map. The forest was unnaturally silent, the air thick with an oppressive weight. As they walked, they noticed the strange symbols carved into the trees, the same ones described in the old tales. Jenny shivered, feeling a cold presence watching them. She tried to reach out with her mind, but was met with a force so dark and malevolent it nearly knocked her off her feet. "We're not alone," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Mark laughed it off, but the others felt the truth of her words. As night fell, they set up camp near an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like twisted fingers. They lit a fire, hoping its light would keep the darkness at bay. But the forest was alive with shadows, and the night was filled with strange, unsettling sounds. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a noise outside his tent. He grabbed his camera and stepped out, the cold night air biting at his skin. The fire had burned low, casting eerie shadows around the campsite. He saw movement at the edge of the clearing and raised his camera, hoping to catch a glimpse of the intruder. Through the lens, he saw a figure standing among the trees, its form barely visible in the darkness. He called out, but the figure did not move. Suddenly, it rushed towards him, and Tom fell backward, his camera hitting the ground. When he looked up, the figure was gone, but the terror in his heart remained. The others woke to his screams and found him pale and trembling, unable to explain what he had seen. Jenny sensed a dark energy in the air, stronger than before. "She's here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The witch is here." The following days were a blur of fear and confusion. The group found themselves lost, the forest seeming to change around them. Strange symbols appeared on their tents and supplies, and at night, they heard whispers in the dark, voices calling their names. Mark's skepticism began to crumble as the reality of their situation sank in. He argued with Sarah, blaming her for bringing them into this nightmare. Sarah, desperate to find a way out, pored over her maps and notes, searching for a clue that might save them. One night, they found Jenny standing at the edge of the clearing, her eyes glazed and unseeing. She had drawn the symbols on the ground with her own blood, her fingers raw and bleeding. "She speaks to me," Jenny said, her voice hollow. "She wants us to join her." Desperation drove them deeper into the forest, searching for the house the hunter had found all those years ago. They stumbled upon it just as night fell, its decrepit form looming out of the darkness. The surrounding air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground was littered with bones. Inside, the house was a maze of dark, narrow hallways and rooms filled with the remnants of past victims. Bloodstains covered the walls, and the strange symbols seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air was thick with the whispers of the dead, and the cold presence of the witch was palpable. Tom set up his camera, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As he filmed, the shadows seemed to come alive, reaching out for him. The others explored the house, their fear growing with each step. They found a room at the center of the house, its walls covered in symbols and blood. In the middle of the room stood an altar, and on it lay a book bound in human skin. Sarah recognized it from her research, the grimoire of Eliza Blake, said to contain the secrets of her dark magic. As Sarah reached for the book, the temperature in the room dropped, and the shadows converged, forming the figure of the Blair Witch. Her face was twisted with rage, her eyes burning with hatred centuries old. "You will all pay," she hissed, her voice echoing with the screams of the damned. Mark, in a fit of panic, lunged at the witch, but she swatted him away with a flick of her wrist. He hit the wall with a sickening thud and lay still. Tom and Jenny screamed, but there was nowhere to run. The witch advanced, her hands outstretched, and the air filled with the stench of death. Sarah, driven by a desperate hope, opened the grimoire and began to read the incantations aloud. The words burned her throat, but she kept going, the power of the witch pressing down on her. The shadows writhed, and the witch screamed, her form flickering. The room shook, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. With a final, earth-shattering scream, the witch exploded into a cloud of darkness, and the house began to collapse around them. Sarah, Tom, and Jenny stumbled out of the ruins, their bodies battered and their minds broken. They made their way back to the edge of the forest, but the horror of what they had experienced would haunt them forever. The legend of the Blair Witch had claimed more victims, and the forest remained as dark and deadly as ever. Blair became a ghost town, a place shunned and feared. But the witch's curse was not lifted. The forest still whispered her name, and those who dared to enter were drawn into her eternal nightmare, their screams joining the chorus of the damned. The Blair Witch would never be truly vanquished, her vengeful spirit forever bound to the woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to fall into her trap. And so, the legend lived on, a dark shadow over the land, a warning to all who dared to seek the truth. Years passed, and the town of Blair remained a place of fear and avoidance. The forest stood as a dark sentinel, its shadows hiding the malevolent spirit of the Blair Witch. The story of Sarah, Tom, and Jenny became another chapter in the cursed history, but the witch's hunger for vengeance was never sated. A decade later, a new group of paranormal investigators, led by Dr. Alice Morgan, arrived in Blair. Dr. Morgan was a renowned expert in the occult, determined to put an end to the Blair Witch legend once and for all. Alongside her were her assistant, David, a tech-savvy skeptic named Lisa, and a medium named Michael, whose abilities were known to be profound. The team set up their base at the edge of the forest, using the latest technology to monitor the area. Dr. Morgan had studied Sarah's notes and the recovered footage from previous expeditions, determined to avoid the mistakes of her predecessors. She believed the grimoire held the key to banishing the witch and had brought a copy of it with her. As they ventured into the forest, they encountered the familiar eerie silence and oppressive atmosphere. The symbols appeared again, etched into the trees, their meaning a grim reminder of the witch's power. Michael, the medium, felt the presence of the witch almost immediately, a cold, suffocating sensation that grew stronger with each step. The team found the remnants of the old house, now overgrown with vines and nearly swallowed by the forest. They set up their equipment, determined to document everything. As night fell, the air grew colder, and the whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing through the ruins. Dr. Morgan opened the grimoire and began to read aloud, invoking the rituals she believed would weaken the witch. As she spoke, the symbols on the walls started to glow, and the air vibrated with an otherworldly energy. The witch's spirit manifested, her form more terrifying than any had seen before. Her eyes burned with hatred, and her voice was a cacophony of rage and sorrow. David and Lisa worked frantically to keep the equipment running, capturing the supernatural phenomena. Michael, attuned to the spirit world, tried to communicate with Eliza, hoping to find a way to appease her spirit. But the witch was beyond reason, her soul consumed by centuries of torment and vengeance. The witch attacked with a fury unlike any before. Shadows lunged at the team, and the walls seemed to close in around them. David was the first to fall, his body thrown against the wall with bone-crushing force. Lisa screamed, but continued to film, determined to document the truth even as her own fear consumed her. Michael, channeling all his strength, tried to hold the witch at bay, his voice joining Dr. Morgan's as they recited the incantations. The room shook, and the air crackled with energy. The witch's form flickered, her screams growing more intense as the power of the incantations took hold. Dr. Morgan, with a final desperate effort, invoked the most powerful banishment spell from the grimoire. The words seemed to burn the air as she spoke, and the symbols on the walls flared brightly. The witch screamed, a sound of pure agony and rage, her form dissolving into a swirling vortex of darkness. As the vortex collapsed, the house began to crumble. Dr. Morgan, Lisa, and Michael fled the ruins, their bodies and minds battered but alive. They emerged from the forest just as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight piercing the gloom. Back in Blair, they reviewed the footage, confirming the existence of the Blair Witch and the power of the grimoire. Dr. Morgan published her findings, hoping to put an end to the legend and bring peace to Eliza Blake's tormented spirit. The forest grew quiet after that night, and for the first time in centuries, the whispers ceased. The town of Blair slowly began to recover, its dark past fading into memory. The grimoire was placed in a secure archive, its knowledge preserved but its power contained. Dr. Morgan, Lisa, and Michael went their separate ways, their lives forever changed by their encounter with the Blair Witch. But deep in the heart of the forest, a sense of unease remained. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and on certain nights, when the moon was full, a faint whisper could still be heard. The Blair Witch's curse was broken, but her presence lingered, a dark sentinel watching over the forest. Those who ventured too close still felt her cold touch, a reminder that some evils can never be fully vanquished. The legend lived on, a warning to all who dared to seek the truth. And so, the forest stood, dark and silent, guarding its secrets, waiting for the next soul to wander into its depths, to awaken the ancient, restless spirit of the Blair Witch.